Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's come out now that the United States has generated over $21 billion in tariff revenue already since Donald Trump's inauguration. The heavy tariffs against Chinese, Mexico, Canada, and really every country that was importing into the US up until Trump went back on that. The tariffs are still on the Chinese, but obviously we had major trade deficits. That's how Trump calculated the original tariffs, and now it's a 10% global tariff for 90 days as some of these deals get worked out. We know Argentina right now is working on a deal. Italy is potentially looking to have a deal maybe through the EU negotiations there, along with Japan and others. So there's going to be a lot of deals worked out, and the point of it is this is amazing revenue. $21 billion generated in what, two and a half, almost at least at this point, almost 3 months in terms of Trump's second term. But this revenue is going to dissipate, obviously, considering the tariffs are not going to be staying on a lot of these countries, and they've already been taken off in terms of, technically they're still on their 10% rates, but when we sign these new trade agreements, we would expect a lot of the tariffs to be fully removed off of these countries. They were originally put on. There was a bad situation when it came to the bonds relative to the stock market. And so when the bonds skyrocketed, the Trump had to do something about that. And that's when he brought the global tariff down to 10%. But we would still expect very good deals. And I talked about yesterday Trump's plans to isolate the Chinese from being able to trade with other countries, and then they trade with the United States as a way to subvert the tariffs. That's not going to be happening anymore under these new trade agreements, and they're all going to be individually negotiated with these countries, and we're going to try and incentivize these countries to stop importing from China. And so $21 billion is a big deal. You're talking about, well, $21 billion over the course of 3 months. What does that average out to a year? How do we really judge it? Because it's not like there's been tariffs on all of these countries. They were put on, a lot of them, for a few days and then taken off. There was Liberation Day, and then a week later, after the markets and the economy and the bonds went crazy, Trump put them back down. But what I'll say is, if Trump sticks to his words on the auto tariffs, we're probably going to generate around $100 billion per year. That's estimated by the administration. And when it comes to China, even if we negotiate, and here's another update, Trump had said today earlier that there are negotiations, there will be a deal happening with China. When that happens, we don't know. There's been some other things happening with China. Now they're trying to get in bed with Greenland and some of these other countries. Obviously, they're going to turn to other countries. They're begging other countries to refrain from doing a trade deal with the United States. They want to negotiate first. If we negotiate with these other countries and we're able to isolate the Chinese are going to be in a much worse position to negotiate with us. But we know the Chinese, they're not going to give in easily. That's just the reality. They want to appear very solid and very stable on the global stage, going up against their number one adversary, the United States. The point of it is, when you look at $21 billion over the course of 3 months, what are we talking about in terms of total tariff revenue? And then how does that affect the situation in terms of Trump trying to implement some of these things that will potentially lose us revenue, like the no tax on tips, the no tax on overtime, the no tax on Social Security, things like that, that the United States was taking in some form of revenue for that. Can this make up for it? I think it can. And the question is, when you're talking about getting rid of the income tax, you're losing around, I believe it's around $2 trillion in revenue. How do you replace that? Is it through the tariffs? Probably not. Because I would say right now, in terms of the tariffs that Trump's going to leave on, whether it's China, whether it's some of these other countries, if there's no deal that's negotiated, the auto tariffs, things like that, you're possibly generating $200, maybe $300 billion per year. I would say at the absolute most, possibly less than that. So this is good generation in terms of tariff money, but it's not going to be 700 or 800 billion like they were originally saying. You would have had to have gone extremely hard. And even when you calculate the 700 or 800 billion, if Trump was for real about this and said they're staying on my entire administration, a lot of these companies would build domestically to not have to pay the tariff. So you wouldn't be getting that revenue that right now U.S. companies are paying in terms of the tariffs and the things being imported from different countries. So the goods being imported from different countries. So there's not a great way to calculate it just because we don't know how many of these companies would have turned to just domestic production, which is the goal of the tariffs. It is absolutely. There's a lot of things to juggle when it comes to that and when it comes to these economic indicators. That's the big problem when it came to Trump's initial liberation day and what that caused, the run and the sell of all the treasuries by not just China, many countries, which spiked the treasuries, which is not what you would expect when you're talking about the economic turmoil that we saw, especially the first 2 or 3 days of the tariffs. And then everyone thought Black Monday was going to happen. It didn't happen. And then Trump, I believe the next Tuesday, said, no, we're bringing the tariffs down to 10% for a 90-day period so we can negotiate these trade deals. And when the trade deals get negotiated, we would expect some more bullish optimism within the market. Now, another thing I want to discuss, I didn't talk about this yesterday, is what Powell said about the Fed potentially cutting rates, not doing it. I mean, it's the same stuff with him where it's this total partisan liberal talking points. Is there any mention of Trump bringing the true inflation down from 2.86% to like 1.34? I just made a tweet about it. You can go follow me on X. Guys, make sure you also like this video down below. But I mean, there's no mention. What about Powell talking? And it's like, it's all these negative things like, oh, they're inflationary. Well, we don't even know how a lot of these tariffs are not even going to stay on. So the overall effect in terms of how much inflation these tariffs cause, it's total speculation. And normally tariffs, if they're done correctly, and I think it looks like Trump's going to do them correctly. Now, whether or not you think the United States should just say, listen, let's take 2 or 3 years. We need a total reset where we tariff everyone. I understand that's what some people wanted. They're disappointed Trump's not doing that. He's kind of doing an in-between thing where he's going really hard against China while, I mean, you can still appreciate what Trump is doing with these other countries. The problem is, originally, if you go really hard against just China, they will just use other countries to get around the tariffs, and we can't have that. So that's why our negotiations with all these other countries, that's why there was a tariff on every import. So at least, even if you have to take the tariffs down to 10%, because there's economic indicators that are saying this is overheating, we need to stop doing this and maybe pull back a little bit, you still get the results you want in terms of the isolation of China and also the renegotiation with these countries to say, you're not going to be accepting these certain imports from China if you want to do trade with us. This is part of our new trade deal. You cannot accept these imports and then send them to us so China can get around the tariffs that we have on them. That's not going to be happening. There's still going to be heavy tariffs on China, whether we do a trade deal with them or not. We have to, because we don't have the infrastructure set up right now to produce the goods that we need in a timely manner. Now, that's all being developed, and that's why it's a weaning off process when it comes to the trade with the Chinese. But we know we need self-sufficiency, and you look at $21 billion, what is the total amount we can generate? You know, I think it's 9 figures for sure per year. But is it really 700 or 800 billion? Probably not. When you're talking about the crunch that we have, I mean, Trump has they've saved a lot of money. Musk has said they've saved $150 billion. You say, well, it's not a trillion. It's a little bit of a letdown. It's still a lot of money. They've saved $100 billion, at least some of that, in terms of getting rid of the Department of Education. And so they have made cuts. We would like to see an audit of the Pentagon. We'd like to see Doge look at that. I don't know what's going on in terms of it. I know they're talking about upping the military budget another $150 billion to $1 trillion. Not too big of a fan of that, but that will stimulate the economy. It is spending. And you could say, well, that's kicking the can down the road. Well, I agree. But at the same time, if we're making cuts in other places and we're potentially bringing in revenue via tariffs, you might be able to get away with doing something like that. So, you know, overall, when it comes to the budget, is Trump going to balance it? It seems right now like a titanic task. Seems very, very hard based on what's been talked about in terms of what they're going to be doing with the military budget and also a lot of these cuts, because that's less revenue. He's also talked about the income tax. Is that really possible to get rid of at this point with already a $2 trillion deficit? Very hard. It has to be replaced somehow, and it's not going to be replaced. That revenue that is generated by the government from income taxes is not going to be generated or replaced by tariff money. There's no way we can generate enough tariff money to replace that at all. That even if Trump kept every tariff on, you probably wouldn't make 700 or 800 billion for one, because a lot of the countries or excuse me, the companies within the United States would say, all right, we will just start domestically producing. And so you're not getting the revenue. Now that also accomplishes the goal that you want, is more domestic production. But there's other factors at play when it comes to that. And I think we will get sizable domestic production with just these tariffs on China, and also the trade barriers that are going to be removed on many of these other countries. A lot of Americans and a lot of American companies are going to love that, because our products are uncompetitive in a lot of these markets because of the VATs, because of the over-regulations that are put on American products. And there's going to be a lot of people that are very happy when Trump renegotiates these trade deals with all of these countries within the next 2 or 3 months. I don't know if every trade deal is going to happen, but there's going to be, I would imagine, several that get done. And there's already been rumors that there are 3 or 4 that are close, that are in the pipeline, that are going to be happening. It would be like South Korea, it would be Japan, it would be Argentina, it would be Israel, Vietnam. So those are some countries that I would say right now, right off the bat, I could see a deal happening soon. EU, it's a little bit more complicated in terms of Italy versus the EU as a whole, but I think the EU will happen. So this is all in the pipeline. It's all coming. This is good money generation. 21 billion will certainly take this. And listen, when it comes to Trump and what he wants to do with the tariffs, it comes down to the China negotiations. That's really what it comes down to. And really all these other countries. I mean, this is going to be great propaganda. As long as, because the thing is we still control leverage over these countries. They need our consumer base. They need access to it. And that's why Trump can kind of squeeze these countries, and we still have serious global power and global force. And this is a way to do it without involving any military. And another thing I think Trump definitely needs to make sure the American people know, that Greenland has went to China, and they are interested in doing a free trade agreement with the Chinese as kind of a backstab to the United States in the way that we've treated them, supposedly, because they're getting all of their news and all of their propaganda via the proxy EU with Denmark. And so Greenland has, and their officials have went to China to try and get in bed with the Chinese in exchange for Arctic control and Arctic influence within the Northwest Passage, within Baffin Bay, within the Arctic Circle. So when people start hearing that propaganda, Greenland is going to have a really tough time, because that's a really bad thing and a really dumb decision that Greenland did in terms of their officials talking about, oh, to get back at the United States. Well, no, that's just proving Trump's point that we need to secure the island because you guys are now in bed or trying to get in bed with the Chinese. That's not going to happen. The EU can't allow that to happen. Look at Greenland's position. It's so advantageous for the United States. It is a North American island. And so, listen, all of this is going to come out, I'm sure, at some point. But Trump right now, we're generating a lot of money in these tariffs, and this is going to help offset all of the tax cuts that Trump wants. His promises, it's all going to offset it. And we might also have to look at some of these offshore accounts as well, in terms of, we know what Trump did his first term with the SALT tax to be able to pay for some of these, putting a cap on it, to be able to pay for some of these tax cuts that he wants. Maybe look at some of these billionaires' offshore accounts. That's a win-win for everyone. Rather than saying we're going to tax these rich people at 70, 80% clips, the better option would be to nip all of the offshore accounts in the butt. And it's not just billionaires, it's also all the corporations as well. So that's something else to look at. So we'll have to see what Trump does in terms of that. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.